you're having a great weekend. I figured I'll shoot a quick video today on maintaining your turnouts. I find that that's one piece of equipment on your layout that seems to get neglected once it has been laid on the layout, and usually is one of the most crucial elements of your track. So the steps I'm going to share with you today are by no means any kind of industry standards or best practices, but rather what I have employed in the last so many years and seem to have resulted in, many years of trouble-free enjoyment of my layout and switches or turnouts. Now, typically, I use Pecco turnouts and track code 100 track for my layout, but for demonstration purposes I have a couple of spare Atlas turnouts here I figured I'll use as they are fairly common out there, and I'm sure most people have these turnouts, so perhaps would resonate better. So a few simple nomenclature to start things off here. So if I'm looking at, I've got two identical Atlas switches here, and so I like to break the switch into three key sections, and that's typically how you would describe a turnout. And so the section between your wing rails, or you refer to a frog here, and to the end of the trailing move area, which is the divergent and the through area of your turnout. This area here is referred to as the crossing panel. Okay, so you got your crossing panel on the far right based on this turnout that I have here. Then between this spot over here of your wing rails, or crossing nose, or frog as sometimes people use them, over up to the switch heels, which are these little pivot points over here. This section here is referred to as the closure panel. Okay, and the entrance of the switch to the switch heel is referred to as the switch panel. It's fairly intuitive because it's your switch rails that move back and forth here in this section, and therefore it makes sense to call it the switch panel. So you get the switch panel, the closure panel, and the crossing panel. Okay, so if you break your switch into those three sections, it's fairly easy to go through the process. So the first thing I do, and this is something, it's just through habit, but I found it to be fairly effective, perhaps may go against most model railroaders' recommendations. From a realism standpoint, I do not ballast my switches. So I will ballast my track all the way up to the facing move section of a switch, and then from the diverging rail track, and also from the through track here on. But this whole section here, I do not ballast. Okay, so most people may disagree with me on that, but for me it's more of a practicality aspect as opposed to realism. And the reason I don't ballast this area is because in any turnout, as you noticed, it's fairly delicate. It's got your switch rails that basically move left to right based on how you move your switch, and you got these delicate little hinges here, which are switch heels. And on the Peccos, they are basically not visible, but on the Atlas you can see the rivet that it hinges on. And of course you got your closure rails that stay permanent and don't move. And then of course you have your stock rails on the ends. And as you know, as locomotives go through these sections, they can easily derail with the slightest deviation of normalcy on your switch. And this is why I don't like to ballast my switches. So let me start off with that. So the most crucial piece of a switch really is the switch panel section, okay, because this actually has the moving parts. But there are two pieces we need to, sorry, there are two elements we need to pay attention to. One is mechanical movement, and two is electrical conductivity. So as long as we take steps to ensure that both mechanical movement and electrical conductivity operate as designed on your switch will operate flawlessly. So let's use that principle to take the next few steps. So let's keep in mind our objectives. Number one, mechanical movement. Number two, electrical conductivity. And so both of those, if you take care of both of those, it will result in long, trouble-free running of your trains and locomotives through these delicate turnouts. Okay, so the first step is that on every quarter or so, I will use either a vacuum or some of these compressed air canisters, fairly close, zoomed up in here, but you know, these canisters that you use to clean electronic equipment. It's just compressed air in a can. I would either use one of those or I would use a vacuum. Either way, to blow any kind of or suck any kind of debris that would sit anywhere in the switch panel area, because this is where typically you'll encounter problems. Now here on your frog area, usually just make sure that there's no debris or anything that you can physically see in here, that you can just clean up with a brush or a toothpick or something, if there is anything in there. But typically, if you do not ballast this section of your turnout, then it's very unlikely you will actually have any kind of debris or dirt on any part of these of this turnout. So looking in here, I would first put some compressed air or a vacuum to make sure there's nothing wedged between the switch rail, the toe of the switch rail, and the stock rails. Okay, and also make sure that there's nothing that's impeding movement here in the switch heels. So the next step I take within the switch panel section of the turnout is that I make sure there is good lubrication, and just a minimum amount that needs to go on in here between the mechanical moving parts, to make sure that the moving parts can move freely with sufficient lubrication. But I also make sure that there is sufficient conductivity as well at the same time. So how do I accomplish that? Is I use this product here, which is called Conductor Lube, and it's a lubricant and a cleaner, but it's conductive. Again, by no means am I endorsing these products. It's just that I'm sharing with you what I typically use on my layout. And the reason I use this Conductor Lube is because it does two things. It's a lubricant and it's conductive. So I put a very minimal amount, a small dab on this side of the control rod, and so as you move it, it will actually move underneath. The liquid will actually flow underneath the structures here and provide sufficient lubrication for the whole control mechanism to move back and forth. And because this is a conductive lubricant, I'll put a small dab in between the switch rail and the stock rail here, and the same goes for the other side. I put a small dab in the switch rail and the stock rail, a small dab in here. And that purpose of doing that is twofold. One, it provides a lubricant for the support rod on this end, so as it slides under the structure here, but it also provides a conductive layer between your switch rail and stock rail, which is crucial for these switches, because that's how it actually gets its electrical connection to pass the electricity from the switch rails over to the closure rails, which are over here. So a small dab of Conductor Lube over here and a small dab over there. And as you notice, there's a little recess on the stock rail which permits the switch rail blade to recess inside here and provide a smooth running surface for your flange of your locomotive wheel. You need to make sure that that's absolutely clean, and you may need to make sure that your switch rail actually recedes all the way in, as seen here. That's all you have to actually do on the switch panel section of the turnout. Now, one additional thing that I also do here is that these hinges are obviously visible on an Atlas, but they're not as visible on a Pecco. But either way, I put a small dab of Conductor Lube also on these hinges here as well to improve conductivity and also obviously reduce the abrasion at these hinges. And that's pretty much all you have to do to maintain your switches. And if you do this in a periodic basis, you'll have some trouble-free running, an enjoyable layout without any kind of derailments taking place on your switches. Now, one last step I'll also share with you is that if you can envision this switch to be on a layout with all the scenery and ballasting done around it, well, then I will also make sure as a final step that there is sufficient clearance on this end with no obstructions on your scenery, and also sufficient clearance on this end with nothing sticking out and impeding the movement of this control shaft as it moves back and forth. So really, a switch is a very mechanical device, and if you were to think of it from that standpoint and then approach any potential areas of impediment, then you'll make sure that you have a switch that functions very well. There's nothing unique about it. So there you go, some few simple steps. I hope you find it useful. And these are steps that anyone can perform on their layouts. Okay, hope you found this video useful again. If you have any thoughts and ideas, please don't hesitate to share them via the comments section, and I'll be more than happy to respond and or comment. Thank you.